my thoughts on the ULEZ expansion is that it is a good thing. It's as Sadiq Khan has said. The reason that he's put it in place is partly to stop children from dying from air pollution, and obviously the other 9,500 people whose lives are ended early by air pollution in London will also massively benefit that as well.
So with regard to net zero, then, so Tony Blair has come out and spoken with regard to net zero, and said that it shouldn't be in the public's, it shouldn't be our remit to have to pay for it. So briefly, Caspar, where do you feel about that? Do you think the public should be paying for net zero?
Well, the public, we all need to pay for net zero. We all need to change our behaviour, and that needs to be led by policy, really, first and foremost. But I mean, Murdoch is still behaving like Tony Blair is still behaving like a Murdoch hack now. He was put in power by Murdoch when he came to power, and now 20 years later he is towing the Murdoch line. He was actually in power at an absolutely opportune time for us to decarbonise our economy and our nation without having to suffer the catastrophic impacts of the climate crisis that we're seeing now unfolding.
Well, I think Murdoch didn't put him in. The people voted for him, even if one paper was supporting him and others. People aren't stupid; they make up their own minds. Harry, what's your view on all of this?
Well, I think this is a really welcome intervention by Tony Blair. What he's reminded us is actually that Britain is only a small share of global emissions, and that means unless we can find a way to decarbonise that is cheap, is affordable for ordinary people, we're not going to inspire developing countries who, by the way, deserve to grow. They deserve to become as rich as we are. We've got to inspire them to decarbonise as well. We're not going to do that by pursuing a really expensive approach that punishes people. We have to find better technologies than that. And so this intervention is really welcome. It promotes, a much more balanced conversation about net zero. And hopefully it will push against those policies like ULEZ, which give too much of a hit on people who maybe can't afford to buy new cars. They suffer enormously because of this. And I think a political class up to now has maybe not been particularly sensitive about the cost of net zero. This is a wake-up call, and actually a welcome reminder that actually less harmful, more consumer-friendly net zero policies will actually have a bigger impact in the long run because they will inspire other countries to copy us as well.
I mean, what do you say to that, Caspar? Surely that the fact that Tony Blair has intervened, he's not saying it's a bad thing, but what he's saying is that actually we are a mere fragment of the whole situation. And actually, if bigger countries see us flailing around in the way we are, that's not really going to incentivise them to get on the bandwagon of net zero either.
So, I mean, what I would say to that is the fact that, one of the things that we have left in our nation is global leadership, which we should be using absolutely as much as we possibly can at the moment to lead the world out of this utter mess and the catastrophes that we are watching unfolding, in Europe as we speak at the moment, and that are worsening in the global south, of course, So, with regards to the economy. For a start, the ditching decarbonising policies will cost the Tories about 1.3 million votes, according to a centre-right think tank called Onward. With regard to global GDP, it's likely to be 37% less come the turn of the century than it is now, without the impacts of the climate and ecological crisis.
So you think that as far as I know, a lot of those fires are actually started by man. They're man-started fires in a very hot climate, which is foolish. I don't know whether you can blame that all on the climate, but I mean...
It doesn't matter how they're started. If they're burning and they're burning more, if you look at Canada...
Any fire would burn. Any fire would burn. You start a fire, it burns. If there's oxygen, the fire will burn, right?
Well, yeah, and obviously if it's drier, then it burns more, which is exactly what we're seeing. And the reason it's drier is because of the climate and ecological crisis. I mean, that's just simple.
Yeah, but the way you sort of painted it is as though the fires are completely the result of the climate change, and they aren't. I'm trying to point out that somebody's actually started the fires, and only a fool starts a fire.
No, the growth in them is, the growth in them, as is the increase in extreme weather. So the increase in frequency and the severity of extreme weather is due to the majority of which is due to the man-made ecological crisis.
Although some people could argue that cold kills more people, and the fact that it's getting warmer, more people have been saved from.
So cold is another example of the climate and ecological crisis, yes, of course.
Well, that's the planet. The planet is an evolving, living thing that will change accordingly. It'll balance itself out the way it needs to. Harry,
so the weather changes, yes, of course the climate changes, but you cannot deny that the ferocity of what we're seeing now currently has been driven by our economy, since industrialisation. That's undeniable.
What the fires are driven by industrialisation? What do you mean? What's driven?
No. The increase in the extreme weather, the severity and the frequency has been driven. The majority of that increase and frequency has been driven by the climate and ecological crisis, which is man-made.
Harry, could you respond to that?
Well, what I would say is voters are sophisticated. They realise that we can tackle climate change while also protecting the economy, and we absolutely have to do that. What some green lobbyists seem to want is actually shovel huge amounts of money towards unproductive industries like the wind and solar industry. That's what's been in America. Joe Biden selling huge subsidies to these companies. And many people here are saying we should copy that approach, but actually it's not going to be a successful approach. How are poorer countries going to be able to copy that? They don't have the money to be able to subsidise these green companies by nearly as much as we do. So this isn't an approach that can be extrapolated around the world. That's what Tony Blair was really saying. So we need a more competitive approach. We need free markets to reveal which are the best green technologies, and they should win on their own merits without people being forced to choose them.
Well, he makes a good point. Surely, Caspar, that's a good point.
What, the American oil billionaire lobbyist, Harry, makes a good point.
The free market. Sorry, go on.
No, it won't. So what he's basically saying is that the cheapest way that we can produce energy isn't the cheapest way that we can produce energy. There's no way of producing energy cheaper than onshore wind. Then there's offshore wind. Then there's solar. There's no way the fossil fuels can compete with creating those energy like that. If we want to make people's lives cheaper, we need to be insulating homes and creating renewable energy so they can heat homes far more cheaply and transport themselves around using electricity and active travel.
Did you want to respond to that?
Well, why then has Vattenfall, who are developing one of the largest wind farms off the coast of the UK, just had to cancel their project because they don't think that it can be done economically? There's this huge costs of renewables above just the building costs. You have to reinforce the grid. You have to provide backup power. There are huge costs to this, and they've been sort of diminished and undered by our politicians for a long time, and they're starting to come out now.
Compared to what? The subsidies for fossil fuels that we've just seen over the last few years, being £160 billion. The costs are incomparable. Yes, you're absolutely right. We need to restructure our grid. We need to reinforce our grid. We need to expand our grid as well. But ultimately, if we want to protect our young, we have to decarbonise. It's quite simple.
Well, Caspar, do you care about is it just the air that you're concerned about? Because, to do all that, we're going to have to have hundreds of miles of pylons. We're going to have, all these things are used in order to make these things. So the wind farms, and you need carbon, you actually need fossil fuels to create these things. So it's going to be a heavy draw on fossil fuels.
In the very short term, yes. And one of the things that we haven't actually discussed here is how we need to be more efficient with our energy use in the first place. And transport is exactly an area that we can massively decarbonise by being more efficient in our transport use.
Can I give Harry last word to you?
Well, I think there are certain type of environmental activists who just want emissions to go off a cliff tomorrow. Actually, that will be incredibly harmful. We still rely on fossil fuels for the vast majority of our energy needs. And transitioning away from that is not going to be easy. It's not going to take time. And it may be expensive if we do it wrong. Let's do it better. Let's do it more cheaply and affordably and inspire other countries to follow suit.